cooking methods. Obviously, we know frying is bad. You talked about when you cook meat and the types of things that happen during cooking. Do those things also happen to plants? Like, is it the cooking method as well as the product, or is it the cooking method?
It's hard to, you can't form as much of a high concentration of these dangerous compounds when you cook plants because there's so much water content. You put a pepper in the oven, it's going to, the skin might blacken, but the inside has a mushroom, the high water content and the cellulose is not going to burn like that and form polyaromatic hydrocarbons. So it's very hard to form these toxins with plants. But you can overcook bread and overcook and bake things and make them crusty. And you could fry things and make like chips and things with more of these hard acrylamides, the dangerous compounds. But it's much easier. The concentrations are much higher in animal products. But that's why we're using so much water-based cooking methods. We're making soup with like vegetable bean soups. We're wokking things in a wok, and the tomato or the pineapple in the wok and the mushrooms that have their own fluid to keep the things moist, and then putting the broccoli or the cabbage in there. So you're tossing things in a wok, so you're not burning it. You could always put a little fluid in the wok, but I don't even need to. The tomato and the pineapple has it, and whatever I'm putting in the wok adds enough fluid to it. And so I'm kind of like half cooking it in the wok and it prevents it from burning, or I'm steaming something, or I'm blanching it. So I'm using a lot of water-based cooking, which then prevents the formation of these compounds that could have been formed from caramelization of the food or overcooking the food. So it's not so we're not using a raw food diet, but we're using a lot of raw food, and the cooked foods are mostly conservatively cooked to prevent the formation of those unsavory, unbeneficial compounds.
So if something's caramelizing, that's too much cooking.
Right. So if you're cooking a sweet potato, I'd rather you cook it at 340 or 330 for 2 hours to get it soft, rather than 360 or 375 for an hour and a half and have it caramelized. You know, chefs want the sugar dripping out of it to sweeten it more, and we'd rather have it get soft but not have the sugar dripping out of it. We want to frying an onion in a pan. We could fry an onion in a hot pan with no oil till it starts to glisten, forms a little translucence, to put it on the eggplant for a flavor. We're not going to cook it so it browns. True, browning it may bring out a little more flavor, but it's probably it's healthier not to cook it so it browns.
And is there a certain, general percentage of raw versus cooked food that we'd like you like to see in a diet?
There's a wide range of acceptability here. I make it so my lunch is mostly raw. I have some soup, but the beans and the vegetables in the soup are usually made so that to maintain their nutrients. We'll blend the onion before we pour in the soup. So I would guess, if you look at by the size of my plate, it's probably 50-50, 60-40, somewhere in that range of half and half raw and cooked, but I'm paying attention to have a lot of raw food, particularly in my big salad for lunch. I have one meal a day that's really, and sometimes I'll have some soup with a salad, but a lot of times my salad's so big, I just would have like a salad and a couple of pieces of fruit. I don't even bother with the soup for lunch,
Great. And would it be great to, can we eat as much raw greens and sprouts as possible?
Well, within limit. I mean, some people, you don't want to eat till you stretch out your stomach till you're full. You don't want to eat till because that's going to create indigestion, and it's going to take too long to digest the food and even create reflux. In other words, yes, within reason, as long as your body weight's favorable and you're chewing very well and you're not eating till you're full or stuffed, you could still eat a lot of food. If you chew it really well, you can fit a lot of vegetables in there. So the point is that we're not eating thimble-sized portions of food. We're satisfied by what we're eating because we're eating a pretty big amount of food, and it's satisfying. So we're not walking around hungry, so you can eat it. And it tastes great with the salad dressings and the sauces we're making. And the sauces and the salad dressings, the point of those are they contribute to the nutrient level of the diet. The dressing of the sauces are healthy in themselves. Not like a condiment that's unhealthy on a healthy. We're not putting an unhealthy salad dressing on a healthy salad. We're putting a healthy salad dressing on a healthy salad.
Okay. And what about eating windows? Not necessarily with intermittent fasting, but which I'll get to in a second. But should we not eat after dinner? And what time is the latest that we should eat in relation to our bedtime?
minimum of 3 hours, better off 4 hours before bedtime. Yes, it's better to have an earlier window at night because you want to finish digesting before you go to bed at night. And last night I screwed up. You know, I try my best, but I'm not always perfect. It was a birthday in my house, and I made the ice cream for the party. Um, and so I took bananas, frozen bananas, macadamia nuts, and some cashews and real vanilla bean powder and soy milk, and I blended it all up with no dates. The banana was sweetened up, and I put it in the ice cream maker, and it made this delicious ice cream, which we had on a homemade, I think it was a homemade apple pie or berry, but I had actually both, which my daughter made. It was all with no sugar. It was all healthy stuff. But you know what? It tasted so good that I had like so much of this banana ice cream that when I went to bed last night, I still felt I was digesting the food. It wasn't that it was that I overate. When you overeat, it takes too long to finish digesting it. And then when you go to bed at night, you can feel some reflux or something's going on up in your belly, and you're not getting it. Number one, you're not getting the anti-aging effects of being going to bed where your body is fully healing. And number two, it's not good for your digestive tract to keep food in your stomach in that long because I overate. So it really gave me a wake-up call, that I got even that, especially on like birthdays or something that where you make some special dessert or something, put it out, make that small amount, enjoy that little bit, but don't go crazy on it because it could upset your digestion at night.
Yeah, to be honest with you, just to hear you say that, it's
Hmm.
people try to be perfect and they get very upset, and it's just nice to hear that, even people who are, on it as good as you are
Right.
human, and we can forgive ourselves for that. But obviously, it doesn't feel that great, regardless.
Right.
So I appreciate you sharing that. Um, so we've heard multiple people talk on B12 and the type of B12. Does it matter cyanocobalamin or methylcobalamin?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's unimportant.
Okay. And are there any plants that we should avoid in our diet?
Yes. Which I'm mad about. I'm in mourning over not eating cherimoyas anymore because I love cherimoyas. They're my favorite food, but they're linked to Parkinson's disease, and they've been studies show that that family of plant, which includes pawpaw and soursop and custard apple and cherimoya and atamoya, those plants. I forgot the name of that grouping of food, which is like I put 10 trees in my property. I loved it so much that are now being more linked to dementia for people who eat them. So I cut down the trees. I removed all the plants. Star fruit can cause problems in the body if you eat much. So that's also is also food you shouldn't be eating much of. And there are some other plants that are also eaten that are not that good for you. Besides, let's see. Um, There's a couple of others that are more unusual, you know what I mean, that you don't get that much in this part of the world. But I mean, but those are the two that come to mind are the star fruit and the cherimoya type, sour sop, sweet sop, um, are those we should not be eating. And I stopped eating them myself. I was eating a lot of that stuff. I was so happy I was living in California because I could get more cherimoyas and grow my own cherimoya trees. It was my favorite food. And then when I started seeing all this research about it, I said, oh, shoot, God, I'm so disappointed I can't eat that stuff.
Well, I've never been introduced to that stuff, so I'm not even gonna look it up because I don't want to like make myself miss it. So and all right, so and how about coconut? Is that with its saturated fat content? Is that problematic?
Yeah, I would think that I don't think a little coconut's a problem. We put like a coconut into like our Thai curry sauce or something. But I think it shouldn't be a major source of your fat intake. It shouldn't be a major source of your nut intake. The other nuts are so much healthier and have omega-3 intake. I even recommend that half of our nut and seed intake come from flax, chia, walnut, hemp, and sesame. That we should have half our nut intake come from that group of 5 or 6, maybe pumpkin in there too. And then you could still, I still recommend pistachio nuts and those other nuts, like Brazil nuts and pistachio nuts. But certainly coconut is not something I'm particularly recommending. And if you are using it, use it in more limited quantity. But I still can use it. You can have a limited amount of saturated of something like that.
So I think it's one of the things that you introduced to the conversation, within the plant-based community, which was EPA to DHA conversion. Is that an issue of the fact that people don't have the right ratios in their diet of omega-3s to omega-6, and that's why they have a problem converting it. So that if they had a closer to a 1-to-1 ratio between the two, they would be better at converting it? Or is it like why, or is there something else that causes that problem?
Something else.
Okay.
In other words, it's being on a vegan diet that you, by not having, because there are some people that convert enough, but those are the minority of people. So, and they're genetically gifted. So what I'm saying right now is even when you have a large number of people on vegan diets, try to manipulate their dietary fat intake to eat much more omega-3 and eliminate omega-6 as much as they can, they still wind up being deficient in the omega-3 index. And they still wind up could have problems and deficits due to that. So if you want to fat manipulate to improve your omega-3 index, and it works for you, and your level of your omega-3 index is 7, 8, or 9, great. Then you don't need to supplement, right? But that's rare. That's a person that's like there's not more than 1 in 10 people who usually can get to that. So yes, dietary manipulations can help some people, but most of us don't have enough ability to genetically convert the short chain omega-3 into enough long chain omega-3, even if we consume more of the short, even if we ate more flax seeds and or restricted more omega-6 nuts more. So there's too much evidence to be able to ignore it, to the fact that a low omega-3 index has dangers, and the dangers are not only dementia, Parkinson's, and brain shrinkage, but it's also decreased all-cause mortality, which means increasing risk of cancer when your omega-3 index is too low.
And if we were to get a blood test, what would we be looking for on a blood test? Is it DHA that we would be looking for? And
no, the best number to look at is the omega-3 index. It's called the omega-3 index, the level of DHA, because that number tells you the relative amount of EPA and DHA compared to the omega-6 fats and omega-9 fats on your cell membranes. So but by the way, when a person has more body fat, it's harder for them to supplement into the most favored range, because more body fat and more fat intake it's the fat on your body that makes the level of the anti-inflammatory fats being a lower percent. If you just kept the same level of omega-3 and you lowered the body fat, your omega-3 index would go up as a percent of total fats. So we're talking here about having a low body fat percent and eating these short chain omega-3, not overeating oils or fats, and also supplementing. You need to do all those things for the majority of people to be pushed into the favorable omega-3 index, which is above 6, which is 6 to 9.
And what is so 6 to 9 is the right range that you should be on for that index, you said?
Yes, we have more studies coming out in the last 2 years demonstrating that not only was brain size better, but overall mortality and longer life was enhanced when people got above 6.
You mentioned eating raw cabbage. What are your thoughts on fermented cabbage and fermenting in general?
I think fermenting can be good, but I'm careful about the salt consumption with fermented foods. And so I might have a person with a breast or prostate cancer, a hormonally sensitive cancer, and I might have them be taking a fermented soy drink, but the fermented soy drink has no salt in it. It's been nitrogen fermented. It's a special product made for that. So the answer is there are some benefits to fermented foods, but those benefits are offset by the extra salt in a lot of these fermented foods. So we can ferment things with vinegar and bacteria and cultures, and we can make fermented foods without putting a lot of salt in. So I'm saying if you do use fermented foods, learn how to make those fermented foods without excess salt.
Okay. And I don't know if you know about fermenting. Do you know what would be considered a healthy amount of salt? I've seen recipes for like a couple of teaspoons of salt when you're fermenting cabbage. Is there like an amount that you would stay under?
Well, I'm telling people in general that I don't want them to use more than 200 or 300 milligrams of sodium over and above what's in their normal diet per day. So your normal diet, we already discussed, could be between 600 and 800. Then the additional sodium you take in that's not in your normal diet, whether it's from mustard or ketchup or from a piece of Ezekiel bread or from something fermented, should be under that 100, should be under the couple of hundred, maybe 300 for male and 200 for a female, should be the max they would be to add to their otherwise food sodium that came from the natural foods.